All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is I'm not sure which number session this is, but this is a part of our 2021 Lunch and Learn webinar, and it's Stormwater 101. Today it's going to be led by Scott. Is it Hofer or Hofer?
Hofer.
Hofer. And as always, the Lunch and Learns are brought to you by the Friends of Birmingham Botanical Gardens in partnership with Alabama Cooperative Extension System, the Alabama Green Industry Training Center, the Jefferson County Department of Health, Jefferson County Commission, City of Leeds, Alabama, City of Birmingham Stormwater Management, and the Stormwater Management Authority Incorporated. If you have any questions today during the session, please feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. We're going to hold all questions to the end while I'll be asking your questions to Scott, and he'll answer them live. And I'm also going to be putting in a link for the survey for today's session during the presentation. And that is just the 5-month-old wanting to say hello to y'all. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Janika Smith, who's going to introduce Scott for us and tell us a little bit about Jefferson County Department of Health.
Okay. Thank you, Dawn, for those housekeeping announcements. Hello, everyone. My name is Janika Smith. I am the Environmental Health Specialist for the Watershed Protection Program with the Jefferson County Department of Health. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Scott Hofer is a public health engineer for the Jefferson County Department of Health Watershed Protection Program with 15 years of experience in the stormwater industry. Scott is a registered professional engineer in the state of Alabama and received a Bachelor of Science degree in environmental engineering and a Master of Science degree in biology from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. He serves on the board of directors for the Alabama Stormwater Association and president of the executive committee for the Southeast Stormwater Association, known as SWMA. I now yield this virtual platform over to Scott to discuss Stormwater 101.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction, Janika. Good morning, everyone. So today I'm here to talk to you about and teach the class Stormwater 101, right? So hopefully today I'm hoping to cover all what you would expect in a 101 class, right? All different parts about all the different topics that deal with stormwater, as well as permitting and a lot more of the overall area of stormwater.
Hey, Scott, let me just stop you real quick. So your voice is coming out a little bit robotic on my end. Is anyone else getting that, or is it just me? Someone just raised their hand that so your voice is coming out a little bit robotic, like staticky.
Okay.
It's choppy.
Okay, if it continues, if I need to, as we mentioned earlier, let's see if it continues.
I think you might have to go to the hard wire.
Okay, can we go do that then?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Did you want to just take 1 second and I will go get hooked up and then I'll start again, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for bearing with us, everyone. He'll be set up in just a moment. Are you there?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Say like a sentence so I can see if it's still choppy.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Hopefully this will work. All right. So, to start again real quick. So first thing I'm going to talk about is what is stormwater? That's the most present question. So hopefully there we go. So it is defined as any precipitation in an urban or suburban area that does not evaporate or soak into the ground, but instead collects and flows into the nearest storm drains, streams, and rivers. So here's a picture of downtown Birmingham, and let's just think about that definition. So realize when it rains, you'll see that the rain would fall on all the different rooftops there, on all the high rises, as well as you realize that it would fall on all the streets, and additionally any of the parking lots, right? So all that, what they call impervious surface, right? That is something in which the water does not go into, versus infiltration, which would be like regular grass or dirt where water can seep into the ground. Impervious surface doesn't allow water to go pierce through it. So hopefully those are very important. I'll use the word impervious a lot throughout this. So due to that fact, all that water that hits those impervious surfaces runs into the nearest storm drain. So the question is, so what decides, where those storm drains go, right? Towards what creek? And so that brings me to my next definition, which is what is a watershed, right? So a watershed is defined as a defined area that drains to a certain point along a water body. So I think this is a great schematic showing you what a watershed looks like. You can see here, sometimes you have springs, which starts a watershed, as well as you have a small tributary, right? An area where the water starts to collect. And as you can see, all these different branches of this river really can almost define its own little watershed. So there could be a small watershed around this small tributary. And then when you come down to this branch here, that would be a larger watershed. And that's important, actually, that you can have smaller watersheds being a part of a larger watershed and then for this area, of course, down here by the ocean, that would be all those small little watersheds joined together would make that larger watershed. So, and you can see, it's all about gravity, right? So when a drop of water drops on one side of a hill and it runs into that drainage area or watershed, versus when it drops onto the other side of the hill, it goes into the other watershed. And so here's a picture of what they call HUC 10. So that's the hydrologic unit code. It's something that the USGS came up with, the US Geological Survey, in which case that's their way of defining watersheds. So you can start at HUC 2. There's about 21 HUC 2s. So that would be a really large watershed within the continental United States. And then when you move to, say, HUC 4, there's about 200, all the way to, and you're adding 2 digits each time. So, there's a large HUC 2 is a large watershed. The HUC 4s would be within those HUC 2s. So this is a picture of the ones that are the HUC 10 digits. I mean, there's 10 digits to represent where that watershed is in regards to all the larger watersheds. And so hopefully looking at this picture of Jefferson County, you can see all the different major creeks that we deal with here in Jefferson County: Turkey Creek, 5 Mile, Village, and Valley. And then you have Shades Creek and the Caba River. So these are the different watersheds. They were kind of cut off. I just used Jefferson County, to show you. And these, of course, continue on to the nearby counties. But this is a picture of all the some of the watersheds here in Jefferson County. So now that I've kind of defined 2 parts of important definitions within stormwater, let's do a little talk about stormwater history. So I think we all know way back since, Roman times, really a lot, there were ditches on the side of roads, right? And that's where stormwater collected, of course, to keep it off the roads, either with their mud or whichever. And then slowly what ended up happening was you ended up having people started then, of course, dumping out, what they call night soil, right? And such into their, into those ditches. So, yeah, let's see. Sorry, real quick, is it not, Dawn, are they not, is my screen showing correctly?
I'm seeing a picture with stormwater history with ditches and pipes.
Okay, that's correct. Yeah. Okay, I just had someone telling me that just to make sure. Okay, thank you. So yeah, ditches were the first thing that we had that dealt with stormwater, as well as I mentioned about night soil, people just, pouring out their feces and such into those areas, and those would, of course, take it to the nearest creek. And usually, most times they say, ditches were around until the 1850s. Then you started having around the 1850s cities, especially some of the larger ones, let's say London, as well as like Paris, where they realized, hey, there's a lot of stench. And there's a lot of really interesting history in regards to the history of stormwater, if you consider that interesting. So then you have where they started joining them together, where they ran sewage as well as stormwater together. And here's a picture here of the London sewage system around 1860. So, and some areas really caught onto this quicker than others. And so really they say, for the most part, the single pipe or combined sewer was from 1850 to about 1930s is really when those were probably most popular. So then starting in the 1930s, and there were some cities that started this even earlier, they started to separate it. They realized the issue that you have about having all the sewage as well as stormwater all mixed together, and that could be an issue. It's a lot to clean. So they started to separate them. So starting in the 1930s, but then as you can expect, especially here in the United States, when we got to after World War I, when we saw a kind of explosion in industry and such, we started to see some flooding. And so I think it's fair to say, again, probably 1960s, 1970s, starting around those times, you started to see retention and detention ponds pop up, which was where you would have this pipe, as you can see here. It would run into, as you can see this picture here, this is a retention area where the water would run into there, right, and it could infiltrate into the ground. Or then additionally, I don't know if you can see, this is a larger pipe over here than this pipe. So what the idea is, almost like a bathtub where the water would go in, it would slowly seep out of the drain hole, if you want, for a bathtub, and hopefully not just cause this huge rush of water coming off all that impervious surface. So that's kind of a history, quick and dirty history of stormwater as far as infrastructure. So now let's talk a little bit about regulatory history. So I think this is a very popular, or very famous, I should say, picture of the Cuyahoga River, which is in Ohio near Cleveland. It caught on fire about 13 times over about 100 years, leading up to 1969. And it really spurred, due to the fact that you had a fire on water, that really spurred the environmental movement. It was one of the large contributors to culminating in the 1972 Clean Water Act. So in 1972, the Clean Water Act, two things happened. It started the Environmental Protection Agency, or otherwise known as EPA. And they started giving individual industries a permit, and they called that point source, right? So if you had a factory on the side of a river, let's just say like the Cuyahoga, you would have to, you were permitted to discharge, and you would have to test your water, and there was different restrictions. And the idea was to hopefully decrease the amount of pollution going into our streams. So that happened in 1972, and those permits are called NPDES permits, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, so NPDES. And so those permits, so fast forward to 15 years later in 1987, you had the Water Quality Act, in which case they realized 15 years later, said, hey, you know, we gave all these permits out to the industries and such, and why is our water quality not cleaning up like it should? And they realized it was additional issues and water quality problems were coming from just runoff off the streets, off of lawns, off of roofs and such. So they gave the name of that non-point source pollution. And so coming out of that, they started to decide, well, how are we going to tackle that problem? Well, they said, okay, well, we'll give these cities, the individual cities, a NPDES permit. So actually they treated the cities as if they were an industry, right? So they had a permit just like some individual industry would have. The cities had a permit. So just a little local history here in Jefferson County. So here in Jefferson County in 1995, the greater Birmingham area received a permit, and they were ALS, that's the permit number. And so in that permit, all the cities were named co-permittees. And then that happened for a while until 2017 is when ADEM decided that they would give all the cities individual permits here in Jefferson County. All right, so here's just a list of all the permitted stormwater programs here in Jefferson County. There are 22 that have permits. Most of them are phase 1, and that's a larger city versus there are phase 2 permits. I don't really want to go deeply into that because they are very similar, but really phase 2 is more for a smaller city. But a lot of the same things, the elements are very, very similar between a phase 1 and phase 2. All right, so let's get into current stormwater issues. So the first one is quantity. This is a great, I love this schematic here, showing what happens with when you increase impervious surface. So some numbers I want you to look at right here is that runoff number. So you see when you had an area that had no house or anything, right, just a natural area, you had a 10% runoff. As well as another number you should probably look at is the infiltration. So you can see there's 25% deep infiltration. So then let's say you start adding, right, 1 house, 2 houses, and continue. You can see how the amount of runoff increases 20%, 30%, until you get down to an area, say, like a large city, downtown Birmingham, where you probably have 75 to 100% impervious surface. And that means that there's, of all the water that's raining on there, you have 55% runoff and only 5% infiltration, or 15 together. So you can see here you had 10% runoff and 50% infiltration versus now having 55% runoff and 15% infiltration. So that means instead of going into the ground, right, you have a lot more water running off into the storm drain system. And this is a picture here of Jefferson County, and this shows you all the impervious surface. So these areas that are black and gray throughout here, you can see this is the greater area of Birmingham, and see how much impervious surface we kind of have throughout Birmingham. And you can see that most of the creeks have a beginning somewhere in these impervious areas. So you have 5 Mile Creek, Village, Valley, Shades Creek has a lot. So a lot of the creeks here have a large amount of impervious surface in their watersheds. And so to kind of hopefully bring home how does that affect a creek? This is what's called a hydrograph. So it's showing here, this is over here, this blue is the amount of rain that's happening. And then this is the amount of discharge, right? This is in volume of water that's happening. And so you can see that in a situation where you don't have, like if you remember that very top left where let's say there's really not much impervious surface at all, it's very rural, you can see that when it rains, right, you end up, there's a certain amount of water, right, the creek does rise, but you'll find out due to infiltration, there's a lot of water that's moving across underground into the creek. And it's like a time elapse into that creek. So therefore you don't have such a quick increase in the volume of water in the creek and it's a lot more stable. So, but in an urban creek, you can see you have a really big spike. So why is that, right? Because there is no really water making its way across underground. Most of it is just running through the storm drain system and quickly getting into the creek, and therefore it's causing a quick spike and a quick drop. And that's, as we all know, we see flooding in different areas throughout Jefferson County. And this is kind of showing you what happens in urban areas with creeks. It's due to the fact of just a large amount of impervious surface. And so here is a graph straight from one of the USGS sites we have. So here's on Valley Creek below Brighton. If you're familiar, 5920 going west down by Jaybird Road is where this site is. And so Valley Creek has a lot of urban area, and you can see what happened on a rain event. You can see how quickly it spiked and came back down. And that kind of shows you that that's what you would expect for a area that is urban and lots of areas that's impervious.
Hey,
and so the second one, yes.
Phyllis Clay just said that she can't hear the audio. Is anyone else having audio issues? Phyllis, okay. Everyone else can hear okay. Phyllis, can you make sure that the audio on your laptop is turned on and is up all the way? Oh, she said she can hear now. Sorry for interrupting you.
Okay. All right. So the next one is quality. And so here is some of the issues. I mentioned quantity and quality. These are the two big issues in stormwater. And so we have a lot of people, right, that pour things down storm drains that shouldn't. We have litter that ends up getting into our creeks and rivers. Washing cars, that per se is not as much of an issue if people use phosphorus-free soap. But again, phosphorus is actually kind of a limiting factor within an ecosystem. So that is something we look into. Pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, they're fine, except for the issue that you just need to make sure that they're following the directions, right? So, the issues that we see is that when there's runoff, or let's say it was not applied correctly and it ended up raining and it ran into the stream, and that's an issue, and that can cause problems with fish, especially when you have fertilizers. Really, you can cause what's called an algal bloom, and an algal bloom ends up causing the oxygen level within a creek to really drop out, which then can cause fish kills. So really important to make sure those are applied correctly. Another thing is dog poop. That is another thing that we try to really curb, because again, you have different bacteria and such viruses that can be out of that. And then the last one here is construction site runoff, right? So dirt, when it runs out into the street and gets into the storm drain system, number one, it can clog up a storm drain. But number two, when you realize the issues that prolonged or elevated amounts of turbidity can have on a fish. So it can get into their gills. If it's elevated for a long time, you have a lot of dirt going in there, then a lot of fish are sight hunters. So guess what? It's cloudy, they can't see, so that stresses them out. So it can have an effect, as well as on microinvertebrates, where a lot of that dirt can get into the crevices where they like to hide. So it can have a large effect, additionally, elevated amounts on our creeks. All right, so now that I've gone over those two generally, now we're going to talk about some of the local stormwater program elements. So the first one is, so there's 10 elements to a permit, and I wanted to kind of go through so that you have an understanding about what are all these different stormwater permit programs doing here in Jefferson County. So the first one is you need to inspect any detention or retention pond, otherwise known as a structural control within a city. Those need to be inspected if it's on it needs to be on the public. So let's say any of the cities in Jefferson County, if they own a detention or retention pond, let's say at their city hall or on some public piece of property, they need to inspect it twice a year, and they need to document these activities. Another large one is public education and public involvement. This is a really big part of our program, and Janika, who introduced me, is a head of our educational program. So this is a big part of what we do. So we have to make sure we try to educate all different aspects and our people within our community. So, citizens, students, business owners, all need to be educated, hopefully, on what they can do to decrease any issues and decrease the amount of water pollution, right, going into our streams. Some of the tools that we have for that are pamphlets, the internet, right, calendars, backpacks, t-shirts, carabiners. There's a lot of different things that all the different cities and programs can hopefully give away to hopefully pique someone's interest or get them to understand more about stormwater. And places that we have to educate, right? We go to city halls, go to schools, local activities, Zoom calls like today, right? To document, and that all these need to be documented again to show that the cities or those programs are making an effort to educate their citizens on what stormwater is and hopefully decrease the amount of pollution. The third is the illicit discharge detection and elimination. This is where basically an illicit discharge, right, is something that should not be discharged into the storm drain system. So that can be someone pouring oil down a creek, right, or down a storm drain. Things like that, different things that people illegally dump can cause being an illicit discharge. So what each program is supposed to do is they're supposed to look at 20% of their outfalls every year. So, and those outfalls, so an outfall is that last pipe before of the storm drain system that empties into the nearest water body and creek. That's called an outfall. So they're supposed to look at 20% of those a year and basically look for those illicit discharges when it's not raining. So we wait 72 hours, which should mean that all the water has kind of gotten out of the system. So if there's water, if there's an outfall that's running, like you can see this picture right here, and it's been 72 hours since the last rain, there could be a good chance this could be a illicit discharge, or it could be an underground spring, but that's what we test for. And these are kind of pictures of issues we've seen in creeks caused by illicit discharges. So a part of this too is to make sure that you have an ordinance about illicit discharges. Construction site stormwater runoff control. This is where the cities need to, I mentioned about the issues that you have when you have erosion and have that sediment getting into a storm drain system and what it can have on the wildlife. So a city is supposed to inspect them either on a monthly basis or every other month, depending on what their watershed, if there's a certain impairment within their watershed. They need to do a checklist and making sure that they go through all the different parts about, hey, this needs to be checked, a silt fence. This is a silt fence that stops dirt from running off sites. Making sure all those and what we call BMPs, best management practices, that's another word that we throw around within stormwater, that all the best management practices are in place to stop the dirt from leaving a site. You can see here, review, make sure again that they have ordinance on that, implement a mechanism for public reporting. That's really important to making sure that that people can report, and then training staff. Post-construction, this is something that's kind of newer, and this is the idea that when a city or one of those permittees have a new construction comes in or a site that's over an acre, that they need to do certain things to capture the first 1.1 inch of rain falling off that site and do something with it. And here are kind of pictures of some things. Usually or traditionally, I mentioned retention ponds and detention ponds or something used, but something that's really encouraged and it's really catching on is what they call LID, low impact development. And that's really the idea of, hey, instead of maybe building a conventional detention or retention pond, you try to infiltrate the water closer to the site, right? So if you can infiltrate the water, right, you shouldn't have as much runoff. And that's the idea behind LID. And you'll see, this is a picture here, right, of a Trussville High School, and you can see where they don't have any curbs, right? So the water runs off onto the ground and infiltrates. This is underground detention, where the water is kind of stored underground and then let out at a slower rate. And then this is a retention pond, but you can see where the water, for the most part, can infiltrate into the ground. But again, you have, if the water gets really high, it can go into this and run out so that it doesn't flood an area. But low impact development is a big part of those larger sites that are an acre and above. Spill prevention, this overall is just the idea that, you know, what's the city doing? Do they have trained staff to make sure if there's a spill, how to react to it? So, and the next one is pollution prevention and good housekeeping. I consider this one, hey, is the city really being a good steward, or the permitted entity? Are they being a good steward? So are they doing everything they're supposed to hopefully stop stormwater issues? So that can mean, right, so number one, if they have a spill, are they making sure they clean it up? Are they storing different, let's say, salt and such? I know we don't have too much salt used really around here, but salt and sand, making sure that they have them stored correctly, right? Making sure, you know, a big part, a lot of cities pick up litter, and that's really great for our stormwater programs because, right, the less litter that's on the side of the road, the less litter that ends up being in the creek, and that's really important. The application of pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers. I think a lot of the cities that I work with are kind of getting away from pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers. But but the idea is, if they are using them, hey, do you document your inventory? Keep up with your inventory. Make sure it's stored safely. If someone's using a chemical that you have to be certified, making sure they're certified, making sure they're trained appropriately on how to use pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers on different areas. And that's really what this is about. So train appropriate personnel and then require proper certifications. Oil, toxics, and household hazardous waste. This is where, you know, I mentioned about litter, but there's a lot of other things, of course, that people, you know, you can't put in your trash, right? So people end up dumping it a lot of times, you know, somewhere. So we started on a yearly basis. A lot of the stormwater programs here in Jefferson County have come together to pay for a household hazardous waste day. And that's where we are trying to kind of take back some of those things that somebody might try to pour out somewhere into a storm drain or on the side of the road, which could end up getting into a creek. So, you know, a lot of things we see is paint. Paint's a big thing. Every year, actually, I get a call about a creek turning white, and it's because someone has washed out some brushes or washed out a little paint can into a creek. That happens. So picking that up. Another thing, of course, that we all know is now with TVs, we get a lot of large screen TVs and things like that, that, you know, kind of, it's not easy to get rid of. People dump on the side of the road. You don't think of that as a chemical, but again, you know, it getting into a creek or causing issues, you know, we want to just keep as much of those things out of our streams and creeks. So that's the HHW. And then industrial stormwater runoff. So this is the idea that within a city, there are probably different, you know, you have mechanics and different small industries. I mentioned at the beginning, right, there are large industries that have NPDES permit, but there are smaller industries that don't quite qualify for an NPDES permit. And so we are looking at those sites and making sure that they are, you know, not causing an illicit discharge or anything along those lines. So high risk inspections, as we call them. And the last element of a stormwater program is water monitoring. So all the different programs have some sort of element about water monitoring. A lot of them have a wet weather condition. So that means like when it rains, hopefully within, you know, what they call the first flush, when that water really starts to go up, that they capture that water to see what's running off the streets. And some cities additionally do dry weather sampling, right, to see, hey, is there some sort of chronic issue in a creek when there is no runoff? As well as maintain continuous monitoring probes we have throughout here in Jefferson County, there's multiple USGS stations that give instantaneous water quality parameter readings all. All right, so now that I've gone through hopefully all those and what a stormwater program is supposed to do, trying to go after that issue of water quality and quantity, I'm going to talk a little bit about, I work at the health department with a group called SWMA. So Stormwater Management Authority, or SWMA, was incorporated in 1997, and the idea was that there would be cost sharing between the cities that were all co-permittees at the time. They contracted with Jefferson County Department of Health in 2009, and just here's a list below of all the current members within SWMA. So we have 22 members. And so I'm just going to go through our educational program. As I mentioned, again, Janika is a large part of this. So what we do here at the health department for those cities that are members of SWMA is we help them with their educational components. So we have different programs here. You can see Enviroscape for kindergarten, through 3rd through 5th, we do water cycle. 6th through 8th, we do the watershed protection, kind of talking about water quality and such. And then 9th through 12th, we kind of go into even more deeper about, let's say more about, hey, what is pH? How does that affect a stream? And then a large part of really that 9th through 12th is what we do is we offer for all the cities the Turkey Creek Outdoor Classroom, where we go to Turkey Creek, work with Charles Yeager there, and we do a half-day class where they get to get in the creek and look at macroinvertebrates, learn about all the different animals that are in streams, as well as we go through water quality in that. So that's a really neat program. Another program that we work with that all the programs here in Jefferson County, SWMA as well as Birmingham, Jefferson County, all work together, Bessemer, is the Litter Quitter program, where students from all different schools do a minute-long video about litter and about stormwater, and it's a great competition where they can win some money. And then the video, of course, you've probably seen hopefully one of our commercials on the TV in regards to hopefully stopping litter. Something else Jefferson County, that SWMA did, is we do some watershed signage we give out to the cities. We help the cities with any city cleanup. We do help them with their pamphlets and internet content there at their city, as well as if they ask us to come out to any different city event and such, we can give out t-shirts, bags, carabiners, and as well as we do public presentations like today, right? So, and here's just some pictures of things that we give out. Our bag, this is Clog the Frog here, that's our mascot. You can see here some brochures. These were stormwater stickers that we put on, our plaques. Here's the Enviroscape. We also do a calendar for SWMA cities, for some of the cities that don't have a website, just to make sure they meet all their requirements for their permit, as well as you can see here one of our watershed signs out. And then here's public involvement. I mentioned about we do cleanups, right? So roadside cleanups, in-creek cleanups. This is Turkey Creek Nature Preserve. This is one of the students, the classes that were there for that, as well as going to different events. This was actually at BAMA, Birmingham area municipal administrators. This was as well as, here's the Mid-Holt program that we worked with HANA, and of course with the Botanical Gardens on a great, all these beautiful flowers and the planting that happened there in Midfield. It also had a stormwater component to it. So these are all different public involvements to try to get people getting the word out about stormwater. So something else we additionally do with our cities is permit documentation. I mentioned all those different elements, as EPA tells us all the time. If you didn't document it, it didn't happen, right? So we offer some different components to our member cities. We call it SOAR, Stormwater Online Activity Record, where here's all those different elements I just went through where they can store information about their program and what's going on in their city, as well as we have the CSI, Construction Site Investigator inspection, sorry. And that's an app that can be on a phone. So any of the cities that are members can use that to do their inspections on a construction site, since again, documentation is really, really important throughout the permits. This is something I'm really proud that we do. So for about 10 years here, SWMA has been doing bioassessments, where we go out to, we have 10 different sites in Jefferson County, and we look at all those and do a bioassessment. So that deals with electrofishing, where we go out and shock the fish, and it just stuns them for a second. You can see our buckets there with some pictures here. We capture them really quickly before they wake up and run off. We capture them and go through and look at those fish and write down what species we capture, as well as we do, here's a seine, which is just a big net to capture fish that are more in the wide open areas. And we take all those fish, and you can see this is Dr. Marion from UAB going through and looking at them and telling us, hey, this is what this fish is. And the idea behind this is, if you capture a whole bunch of fish that are sensitive, as they consider sensitive species, so a fish that can't really live in bad water quality, that would be a sensitive species that has to have good water quality. That's a sensitive, and versus a hardy fish, one that can live in basically anything. So if you get a situation where we only have hardy fish, that means there's probably a water quality issue in that area. Versus if we get one that has lots of variety of fish, sensitive and hardy and all, that's a good sign. That means that creek is doing well. So so we've done that for 10 years. It's a nice longitudinal study. And this is, I love this picture of Dr. Marion, if any of y'all know him. Wonderful, wonderful man. And so the next part is stormwater infrastructure mapping and dry weather screening. This is something that we do kind of, I say, on the side when we're not doing high risk inspections or going out and doing some of those outfall mapping, or I should say outfall screening. We are trying to map the storm drain system. And so we've been doing that now for about 10 years. And so we have, for all the cities, we have about 27,000 inlets mapped with pictures, as well as about 71 miles of pipe for all those cities. And that's something we kind of do when, especially let's say on a wet day when you can't really do anything else. We've done sampling. That's kind of what we do. As well as here's a picture of us doing dry weather screening. I mentioned about looking for outfalls, going and testing them. We walk creeks, we canoe creeks, we do whatever we got to do to look for those outfalls. And we do all these for our member cities. So here's just some more services provided by JCDH. First, we did a SOP manual to help the cities that are members. We developed pro forma ordinances for the cities, making sure that they fulfill the ordinance requirements. A lot of the different elements ask for ordinances. We write the annual report each year with that information that we get in SOAR that the cities give to us. We developed a template for the SWMPP, which is the Stormwater Management Program Plan, which is the idea behind that is city's supposed to write that every year, and it's supposed to say, hey, this is what we're going to do in the upcoming year. So it's a really important document. So we helped them customize that, make sure that it's meeting their city's needs, and then they're making sure they're meeting their permit requirements. And then we designed a watershed approach monitoring plan. So we monitor different areas throughout all the member cities to make sure that that the water quality is good. JCDH also paid for continuous monitoring USGS sites, as I said, throughout the SWMA cities and such, as well as we partner with some of the other cities in regards to these instantaneous water quality parameter sites. So I think that's a really neat thing. You can see what's happening in a creek instantaneously, or about every 15 minutes is when it reads. And then JCDH works erosion and water quality complaints for a city. If a city asks us to come out, we'll come out and work it and do any sampling if need be to make sure we can understand what that illicit discharge is. I mentioned we do the high risk inspections for the cities to make sure they meet that requirement. And then we provide any training for the cities that's mentioned in the permit. We have either we come out and train them individually, or we have videos that they can watch about different components to make sure they meet all their requirements. So, all right, I think it's 12:17, hopefully. So is there any questions
Yes, there are a few questions inside the chat. I'm gonna scroll back up on my chat so I can get
Okay.
the
I'm going to
first.
open mine so I can see them hopefully too.
Okay.
Well, I can't.
So Jessica said it feels overwhelming. How can we help beyond making good individual choices?
I think I think getting involved in your city, maybe, you're right. There's there's a lot to do. I think spreading the word, a big thing that I see when we go to different cities in the general public, a lot of people still don't understand that the water that runs off to the street doesn't go to a water treatment plant. And I think hopefully a lot of people realize that, hey, if they realize that, hey, this water is going on, there's not going to a treatment plant. Oh, I need to make sure I don't dump anything. I hope that's something. So that's a big thing that we trying to get the word out, just really understanding that stormwater is not treated. That's really the first step. And I hope that kind of helps push people to understand how to treat, hopefully, the environment.
Okay. Also, there are all the creeks that you mentioned, except for I think Village Creek has a society that people can also join and support if they're interested in supporting those creeks. And there's also the Alabama Rivers Alliance if you're looking to look at the state's water as a whole. And their big push right now is getting a water plan because Alabama is one of the few states that doesn't have a water plan when there's a drought or anything.
Yeah, no, and you're right. Well, the ones there is a Village Creek Society. Valley is the one creek that doesn't really have a group. And there's a lot of cities on there, and I'd love to see Valley Creek Society show.
Yeah. Okay. Jessica also asked about massive pesticide use along creeks and ponds. There are severely sprayed areas in Irondale and Mountain Brook that I have seen in the last year. What's the first step in addressing this? It looks to be also related to power lines, so maybe Alabama Power.
Yeah, I mean, my hope is for those kind of situations that you're really having, well, number one, hopefully they're using the correct, there are pesticides and herbicides that can be used close to creek, which means as soon as they kind of get into a creek, they're inactive. So I hope that they're, big thing is number one, making sure people are using the correct pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, that if they're spraying close to a creek, making sure going back to making sure they're spraying at the right time, following the directions, not maybe making it more concentrated than it should. Those are kind of the ways, I guess, looking at how to hopefully stop any issues that can be caused by pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers.
And I know that Homewood had a push some years ago where they got the city to stop spraying that spray for mosquitoes. And I'm not exactly sure how they did it, but it can be done if you do partner together with some people.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I deal with one city, and they one city I know is particular that they had to spray every once in a while close to a creek, but they used the proper. There are ones out there that can be used near a creek, but there are some that you can't use near a creek. So just making sure they use the proper product.
Yeah,
that's really important.
Brenda wants to know if Shelby County has a similar program.
Yes, they do. Shelby County also has, I think, unincorporated Shelby County, as well as I think Alabaster, Pelham, Helena, all have stormwater permits. And actually, I think a lot of them are just now, they're just getting their newest permit. It's a 5-year cycle, and a lot of them are getting their new permits.
Okay. Lisa would like to know how to schedule an appointment to learn more about stormwater infrastructure mapping and dry water screening in her area.
I think I would contact my city and just ask them, hey, what I guess, I mean, again, getting involved in your stormwater program in your city, asking kind of what they're doing. It should be, I'll tell you this, every year, we ask all the cities as part of their permit is to ask for public input into their SWMPP. every year. And so that is one thing I would, it usually happens in January because the permits, or I should say the annual report and all is due at the end of January. So during the month of January, your city should be putting out publicly asking for feedback on their SWMPP. So you're asking, and that'd be a great way really if anybody wants to get involved in their city, is to look at that and ask questions, ask your city questions and give your input into their SWMPP.
Michelle wants to know if you know of any company with expertise in making rain gardens.
I don't know of any. I do know there's some great, I think on the internet, there are different, I know I'm just throwing out, I know North Carolina State Extension has some great resources in regards to just stormwater overall issues, backyard creeks, things like that. I think there's some good free things out there. I don't know of any companies per se here in Alabama that specifically about a rain garden.
There are many streets in our neighborhoods that have broken or collapsed stormwater drains at the curb. What does this do to the environment? Is there a solution?
Well, I think broken storm drains, lids and stuff, I don't think it does per se anything to the environment, but the issue I could see is if you have a collapsed storm drain lid or something that would not allow water to go in, of course, that can cause localized flooding. Additionally, a big thing I think we all know, heard in the news is infrastructure. And, a lot of our infrastructure here in Jefferson County is kind of getting towards the end of its lifespan. So, trying to make sure that our stormwater infrastructure is, maintained and in good shape is really important. And that's, I think you'll see that as being a big issue, in the upcoming years here.
Okay. Do you have the contact information for the person in Pelham that you can share?
I don't know. I don't know the individual person at Pelham. I would hope I could tell you their permit number. And if you want to write to share my email address after this, I could write to that, but I don't know the individual person.
Yeah, you can put it in the chat at any time.
Okay.
Can you give us a website for best practices for elimination of household cleaning?
Like household, like different.
Everything that y'all usually take for Household Hazardous Waste Day.
There is, Janika, if you want to mention anything, I know we have the environmental book, the green book that we had. Janika, do you want to mention anything?
Yes, I can unmute myself now. Great question. I would try Earth 911. And if you put in the item that you're interested in recycling and your zip code, and they will pull up the area that's nearest to the location that you can take those items. And a lot of times they may be free of charge. You can also check with some hardware stores as well. They take a lot of items that you can recycle, as well as some of the grocers also. As far as being one centralized site, to my knowledge, there are not any, but the household, you can check Birmingham Botanical Gardens as well. We share our event flyer with the community partners in Jefferson County that host the Household Hazardous Waste Collection Day every year. Also, there is an electronic collection day coming up during the month of September or October, but that will be shared with Don as well to share with the panelists, and all the guests are on the screen as well.
Yes.
Thanks, Janika.
You're welcome.
Okay. I'm going through to see if we have any more questions in the chat before I move to the Q&A. Oh, so we had someone from Atlanta that was asking questions. And Pelham's web address for their storm program has just been added for anyone that was looking for
Great.
that. And electronics is October 9th. We have 2 questions in the, any information on the next hazardous waste day. So the next hazardous waste day, I was just told, is October 9th. It's going to be electronics. Also, just so everyone knows.
And our next, and it should be our household hazardous waste day. Yeah, there you go. April of next year, we should have one. The date's not fully set, but it should be in April. So
that one always happens around Earth Day, because every time we have our Earth Day celebration, Hana is there. So the actual household hazardous waste day is in April. I want to say it's going to be April 24th.
I'm sorry, Don, if you can hear me, if I unmuted myself. The next day for 2022 is April 9th.
April 9th?
And that has been confirmed.
Okay.
April 9th, 2022. Now, there will be an electronic collection day. I think someone put it in the chat. I may have saw it come up for that day.
She said in October.
October, yes. But that would just be electronics.
Okay, and y'all
paper shredding.
Yeah, and y'all also partner up in the summer. I know this summer y'all did 3 back to back, it feels like.
Yes, with the fellow stormwater programs, electronic collection day.
And to see that, if you follow Jefferson County Department of Health or Jefferson County Facebook page, they post that around the time when they host them, so you'll see those during that time. Again, I just want to encourage everyone to fill out the survey link that I just posted. And our next Lunch and Learn is going to be on July 28th, and it's going to be planting fall veggies with Jessica Hill of Jones Valley Teaching Farm from 11:30 to 12:30, and that is now open for you all to register for. And I just want to thank Scott and Jonika for joining us today to teach us more about stormwater. We started this session last year when Hana did a stormwater session for us. And we realized that people wanted to learn more about stormwater and what's being done in their areas. And I feel like y'all did a wonderful job today. And I got even more information than I got last year with Hana. So I feel like every time we have a stormwater presentation, I'm going to be learning something new. And I just want to thank y'all for what y'all do and for being a partner with us and helping us put this series together, our rain barrel workshop, and everything else that y'all do with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to come and talk today.
And don't forget to put your email down in the chat, Scott. Janika, if you want to put your email down there so people can contact you with any more questions, now would be a good time to do that. Oh, okay. I'm going to copy it and make sure that it goes to all panelists and attendees, y'all. Just give me 1 second. I have a squiggling little baby in my arms. So that is their contact information. If y'all have any other questions or concerns, they can help you all. And thanks again for joining us today. We'll see y'all on July 28th. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.